The light in Aurelia was designed to flatter. It was a soft, honeyed glow that dripped from crystal chandeliers, pooling on white tablecloths and making the diamonds on the patron's wrists glitter like captured stars. It was a light that forgave wrinkles, softened hard edges, and made everyone feel like a masterpiece in a private gallery. Everyone, that is, except the staff. For them, the light was a spotlight, demanding perfection. Isabella Rossi moved through this golden haze like a phantom. Her black uniform was immaculate, her movements economical and precise. She refilled water glasses with a whisper of motion, cleared plates as if they were feathers, and maintained an expression of serene neutrality. To the diners, she was a part of the expensive scenery, as functional and unnoticeable as the polished silver forks. This was her strength. In a room full of people desperate to be seen, her power came from being invisible. Her target tonight was in the corner booth, the one with the best view of the city and the least view of the room. Julian Thorne. His name was a headline, a brand, a synonym for ruthless success. He was a titan of industry, a real estate mogul whose skyscrapers redrew city skylines and whose corporate takeovers were the stuff of brutal legend. He sat like a king on a throne of plush red leather, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his suit a custom-tailored armor of dark silk. With him were two younger men, sycophants who laughed too loudly at his dry remarks and nodded eagerly at his pronouncements. For 2 hours, Isabella had served them. She had presented the Chateau Margaux, describing its notes of blackcurrant and cedar with the rehearsed grace of a sommelier. She had delivered plates of seared scallops and truffle risotto, placing them on the table with a surgeon's steadiness. Through it all, she watched and listened. She noted the way Thorne's eyes, the color of a winter sky, never truly smiled. She observed how he dismissed his companions with a flick of his wrist, how he checked his phone, a sleek encrypted device, every 7 minutes. He radiated an aura of profound, unshakable arrogance, the kind that comes from a lifetime of buying and selling the world without ever being told no. The meal was concluding. The dregs of the $1,000 wine stained the bottom of the crystal glasses. Thorne leaned back, dabbing his lips with a linen napkin. He had been speaking in low, dismissive tones about a new acquisition, a tech startup he planned to gut for its patents. "The board is sentimental," he'd scoffed, his voice a low rumble of contempt. "They talk about the founder's vision. Vision doesn't pay dividends. I'll handle it. I always do." He finally looked directly at Isabella, though not at her face. His gaze was fixed somewhere on her chest, a gesture of casual dehumanization. He snapped his fingers, a sound as sharp and offensive as a gunshot in the hushed restaurant. "The check," he said in English, his tone bored. Then, leaning towards his companions with a smirk, he switched to Spanish, assuming the hired help was monolingual, an uneducated fixture of the room. "Asegúrate de que no añada una propina para sí misma. La pequeña ladrona. Probablemente roba los cubiertos cuando nadie mira." The words sliced through the air, intended as a private joke for his table. "Make sure she doesn't add a tip for herself, the little thief. She probably steals the silverware when no one's looking." His companions chuckled, a greasy, obsequious sound. Isabella's posture didn't change. Her expression remained a placid mask. Inside, however, a switch flipped. The years of training, the months of surveillance, the entire weight of the investigation coalesced into a single crystalline moment of purpose. She had waited for this, for him to expose the rot beneath the polished veneer, to underestimate her so completely. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod and turned to retrieve the bill. The restaurant manager, a nervous man named Jean-Pierre, watched from across the room, sensing the shift in the atmosphere around booth 12. He saw the waitress return, not with the leather-bound check folio, but with something else in her hand. He saw her stand before the most powerful man in the room, a man who could buy and sell this entire city block without a thought. And he saw her begin to speak. Isabella returned to the table, her steps measured and deliberate. The golden light of Aurelia seemed to focus on her, the hushed symphony of clinking glasses and muted conversations fading into a dull roar in her ears. She held no bill folio. In her hand was a single folded document, its crisp edges stark against her palm. Julian Thorne didn't even look up at first. He was swirling the last of the wine in his glass, admiring the way it clung to the sides. "Did you go deaf, sweetheart?" he drawled, still in English. "The check. Now." Isabella placed the folded document on the table beside his plate. It landed with a soft, definitive sound. Thorne glanced at it, annoyed. It wasn't the bill. He finally lifted his cold eyes to her face, ready to unleash a torrent of fury that had sent CEOs and board members scrambling for cover. But he stopped. The serene, vacant expression was gone. In its place was a look of diamond-hard focus. Her eyes, which he'd never bothered to notice before, were a deep, intelligent brown, and they were fixed on him with an intensity that was startling. She leaned forward slightly, her voice low, clear, and devoid of any deference. And she spoke in Spanish, a flawless Castilian Spanish that was purer than his own clumsy boardroom version. "Señor Thorne, a veces la pequeña ladrona no está interesada en los cubiertos," she said, her tone as sharp as shattered glass. "A veces ella está aquí por peces mucho más grandes. Mr. Thorne, sometimes the little thief isn't interested in the silverware. Sometimes she's here for much bigger fish." A wave of confusion, then shock, washed over Thorne's face. His smirk faltered. His two companions froze, their wine glasses halfway to their lips, their eyes darting between Thorne and the waitress. They didn't understand Spanish, but they understood the sudden, lethal shift in power. Isabella straightened up, her voice seamlessly transitioning back to crisp, unaccented English. "Julian Thorne," she said, her voice now carrying a weight of authority that filled the space around the table. "My name is Special Agent Isabella Rossi of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." She unfolded the document on the table with a flick of her wrist. The bold, official letterhead of the United States Department of Justice was unmistakable. "This is a federal warrant for your arrest." The words hung in the air, electric and impossible. Thorne stared at her, then at the warrant. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a pallid mask of disbelief. The Titan, the king, looked utterly lost. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. It was as if his entire world, built on the certainty of his own superiority, had just been demolished by a waitress in a black uniform. "On what grounds?" he finally managed to rasp, his voice a dry whisper. "The warrant specifies multiple counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to violate the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act." Isabella recited, her memory perfect. "This is in connection with your subsidiary, Oro Verde Logistics, and its financial dealings with the Serpiente Syndicate." The name of the cartel landed like a physical blow. One of Thorne's companions visibly flinched, spilling red wine on the pristine white tablecloth. It spread like a pool of blood. The quiet of the restaurant was shattered. Jean-Pierre was already hurrying over, his face a mess of panic and confusion. But before he could reach them, the front doors of Aurelia swung open. 4 men and 2 women in dark suits entered, their movements swift and professional. They didn't rush, they flowed into the room, their eyes scanning, securing the space. One of them, a tall man with a grim face, caught Isabella's eye and gave a slight nod. Her back up. "You're making a mistake," Thorne hissed, his composure cracking, replaced by a venomous rage. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. My lawyers will have you fired and disbarred. You'll be directing traffic in Alaska by next week." Isabella didn't flinch. She simply looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Your lawyers have been notified, Mr. Thorne, as have yours." She gestured with her head towards his 2 companions, who now looked like terrified children. "Agents, secure them." 2 of the suits moved in on the companions, who raised their hands without a word. The tall agent, Mark Coulson, approached the table. "Julian Thorne, you are under arrest," Isabella said, her voice steady and formal. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." She was no longer a waitress. She was the law. She was the consequence he never thought would arrive. As Agent Coulson moved to cuff him, Thorne lunged, not at the agents, but across the table, his face a contorted mask of fury. He wasn't trying to escape. He was trying to get to her. "You," he snarled, his voice guttural. "Pagarás por esto, perra." "You'll pay for this, bitch." Coulson and another agent intercepted him easily, slamming him back into the plush leather of the booth. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was brutally loud in the now silent dining room. The other patrons were frozen, staring with a mixture of fear and morbid fascination as the great Julian Thorne, the untouchable man, was hauled to his feet, his expensive suit rumpled, his dignity stripped away under the flattering, honeyed lights of Aurelia. As they led him away, his eyes locked with Isabella's one last time. They weren't the eyes of a defeated man, they were the eyes of a predator cornered, promising retribution. Isabella stood her ground, her heart hammering against her ribs, but her exterior was pure steel. The operation was a success, the arrest was clean. But as she watched them walk Julian Thorne out of the restaurant he practically owned, she knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. And he had just made it personal. The pristine elegance of Aurelia dissolved into controlled chaos. Diners, snapped out of their stupor, began whispering, their phones emerging discreetly to capture the downfall of a giant. Jean-Pierre, the manager, wrung his hands, his face ashen, murmuring apologies to no one in particular. The FBI team worked with chilling efficiency, a stark contrast to the opulent surroundings. Thorne's two associates, pale and trembling, were led out through a side exit to avoid the inevitable press that would soon descend like vultures. Isabella, now addressed as Agent Rossi by her colleagues, stood by the table, the scene of her triumph. The spilled wine had soaked deep into the linen, a dark, ugly stain on the perfect white. It felt symbolic. Agent Mark Coulson, her senior partner, came to her side. He was a man built of straight lines and sharp angles, with a face that rarely betrayed emotion. "Clean arrest, Rossi. Textbook," he said, his voice a low gravel. His reaction was spirited. "He doesn't like being underestimated," Isabella replied, her gaze still fixed on the restaurant's entrance, where Thorne had disappeared. "That's what this whole case is built on," Coulson grunted, him thinking everyone else is an idiot. "You played the part perfectly. For 6 weeks, you were the best damn waitress in this city. 6 weeks of long hours, sore feet, and enduring the casual cruelty of the ultra-rich. 6 weeks of memorizing wine lists and specials, all while her real focus was on the man in booth 12. She had listened to his phone calls, noted his dinner guests, and mapped his patterns, all under the guise of refilling his water glass. The Spanish insult hadn't been a surprise. It was the exact brand of hubris the Bureau's psychological profile had predicted. It was the key she needed to turn the lock. "The warrant is just the first step," she said, more to herself than to Coulson. "A man like Thorne doesn't just fold." "No," Coulson agreed. "He has layers, like a rotten onion. We've just peeled the first one." He tapped the warrant still sitting on the table. "This gets us access to his personal financials, his servers, his entire digital life. The real work starts now. Let's go. The forensics team will be here to bag his devices." As they walked out, Isabella took one last look at the dining room. The spell was broken. The honeyed light now seemed harsh, exposing the fear and uncertainty on the faces of the wealthy patrons. They were looking at her differently now. She was no longer invisible. She was a reminder that their gilded world was fragile, that consequences could walk in wearing a waitress's uniform. Back at the FBI's New York field office, the atmosphere was electric. The arrest of Julian Thorne was a seismic event, sending shockwaves through Wall Street and beyond. The large open-plan room buzzed with activity. Agents huddled around monitors, phones rang incessantly, and the large evidence board dedicated to Operation Gilded Cage was already being updated. Isabella, having changed from her uniform into a simple blouse and slacks, stood before the board. It was a chaotic tapestry of photographs, financial charts, and color-coded strings connecting shell corporations to offshore accounts. In the center was a large photo of Julian Thorne, smiling confidently at a charity gala. Surrounding him were dozens of smaller photos, associates, politicians, and shadowy figures. Her boss, Assistant Special Agent in Charge David Carter, a veteran with tired eyes and an impeccably sharp mind, clapped a hand on her shoulder. "The U.S. Attorney is ecstatic, Rossi. He's already planning the press conference. You did good." "He's not going to make it easy, sir," Isabella said, her focus still on the board. "He named the Serpiente Syndicate." Carter's expression hardened. We know. That's the RICO charge. Oro Verde Logistics was his primary tool for washing their drug money. He'd buy distressed real estate with cartel cash, flip it through a dozen shell companies, and integrate it into Thorn Consolidated's legitimate portfolio. It was brilliant and almost untraceable. Almost, Coulson added, joining them with 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Isabella. The break came from an informant in Panama. He gave us the initial leak about Oro Verde. It took us a year to connect it to Thorn himself. He's insulated by a firewall of lawyers and cutouts. That's why your undercover op was critical, Izzy, Carter said, using her nickname. We needed to serve him personally, catch him off guard before he could trigger his protocols, wiping servers, shredding documents, getting key witnesses out of the country. Your work at Aurelia gave us that window. Isabella took a sip of the coffee. It was bitter and strong, a welcome jolt back to reality. The phrase he used in Spanish, La cuenta está pagada en sangre. The bill is paid in blood. It's one of their recognition codes, isn't it? Carter nodded grimly. It is. It confirms he wasn't just a passive money launderer. He was a direct, witting partner. He knew exactly whose blood was paying for his skyscrapers. This elevates him from a white-collar criminal to a narco-terrorist financier. That's why we have to be careful. The Serpient don't leave loose ends. The implication was chilling. Julian Thorn wasn't just a man with powerful lawyers, he was a man with powerful and violent allies. As if on cue, a junior agent hurried over. Sir, we just got a call. Thorn's lawyer is here. She's demanding to see her client. Already? Coulson asked, surprised. That was fast. Who is it? Miller, Goldstein. The agent shook his head, looking nervous. No, sir, it's Evelyn Reed. Carter let out a low whistle. A silence fell over their small group. Evelyn Reed wasn't just a lawyer, she was a legend, a fixer. She represented dictators, arms dealers, and mob bosses. She didn't argue the law, she dismantled it, bent it, and twisted it to her will. She was brilliant, ruthless, and had never lost a major federal case. He didn't call a lawyer, Isabella realized aloud. He called a weapon. Carter's face was grim. All right. Coulson, you and I will handle Reed. Rossi, I want you to start a deep dive into everything we seized from the table. His phone, his companions' phones. We need to move faster than she does. Our clean arrest just got very, very messy. Isabella nodded, a knot tightening in her stomach. She knew that look in Thorn's eyes wasn't an empty threat. It was a promise. And Evelyn Reed was the down payment. The game had just changed, and the stakes had been raised exponentially. The interrogation room was cold and sterile, a world away from the warmth of Aurelia. Julian Thorn sat at the metal table, the sleeves of his custom shirt rolled up, his tie loosened. The arrogance had returned, settling over him like a familiar cloak. He looked not like a prisoner, but like a CEO inconvenienced by a minor delay. Across from him, Isabella and Coulson sat impassively. For an hour, he had said nothing, merely staring at them with an expression of amused contempt. He had refused water, ignored their questions, and was clearly waiting. He knew help was coming. The door opened and Ace Carter walked in, followed by a woman who commanded the room before she had even fully entered it. Evelyn Reed was in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a severe haircut that framed a face accustomed to getting its way. Her suit was a razor-sharp sheath of grey, her heels clicking with an unnerving rhythm on the concrete floor. She carried a leather briefcase like a weapon. "Agents," she said, her voice smooth and cold as marble. "I trust you haven't been boring my client with your hypotheticals." She didn't wait for an answer, placing her briefcase on the table with a soft thud. She looked at Thorn, a flicker of communication passing between them that was faster than words. "Evelyn Reed, I'm Mr. Thorn's counsel," she announced, turning her piercing gaze on Isabella. "And you are?" "Special Agent Isabella Rossi," Isabella replied, her voice even. Reed's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of assessment. "Ah, yes. The Waitress. A bold piece of theatre, Agent Rossi. I assume you enjoyed your moment of drama." Her tone was dismissive, designed to belittle, to put Isabella back in her place as the hired help. "This interview is over," Reed declared, turning to Carter. I want a copy of the warrant, the affidavit, and all discovery materials immediately. My client will not be answering any more questions. He hasn't answered any yet, Coulson grumbled. Reed ignored him. Furthermore, I'm filing a motion to have this entire arrest thrown out. The warrant was obtained based on evidence from a tainted, unreliable informant and served under duplicitous and coercive circumstances. A waitress? You'll be laughed out of court. Your client incriminated himself with a cartel recognition phrase in front of 3 witnesses, Isabella stated calmly. A small, dangerous smile touched Evelyn Reed's lips. My client made an off-color joke in a language he barely speaks to his associates. You, Agent Rossi, twisted it to fit your flimsy narrative, a classic case of entrapment and confirmation bias. We will have your undercover conduct scrutinized to the letter. She was already spinning the narrative, turning Isabella's strength, her fluency, her meticulous operation, into a liability. She was painting her as an overzealous agent, tricking an innocent businessman. You have 24 hours to provide the requested documents, Reed finished. She then turned to Thorne. Julian, don't say another word. I will have you out on bail by morning. See you in court, Agent Rossi, Thorne said, his voice dripping with condescending victory. He looked at her as if she were once again the girl clearing his plates. After they left, the 3 agents stood in the observation room, watching Thorne and Reed confer in hushed tones through the one-way glass. She's good, Coulson admitted reluctantly. She's going to attack the process, drown us in paperwork, file a dozen motions, and try to discredit every piece of evidence before it ever sees a jury. Her strategy is to make this about us, not him, Carter said, rubbing his tired eyes. She'll put the Bureau on trial. Specifically, she'll put you on trial, Izzy. She'll dig into every aspect of your life, looking for a crack. Isabella felt a chill. She knew the protocol. Her life was an open book to the Bureau. But in the hands of someone like Evelyn Reed, any detail could be twisted into something sinister. An old boyfriend, a speeding ticket, a disgruntled former colleague. Anything could become a weapon. Let her try, Isabella said, her jaw set. While she's busy with that, we need to find something she can't spin, something solid. For the next 48 hours, the team worked relentlessly. Isabella led the analysis of the seized electronics. Thorne's phone was a fortress, protected by military-grade encryption. But his 2 associates were less careful. Their phones were a treasure trove of calendars, contacts, and messages that, while coded, began to paint a picture. Isabella found a recurring appointment in one of the associates' calendars, labeled simply Port Drop. It occurred on the last Friday of every month, at a location listed only by a set of GPS coordinates. Cross-referencing the dates with financial transfers from Oro Verde Logistics, she found a pattern. A massive outflow of funds was recorded within hours of each port drop. He's not just moving money electronically, she explained, pointing to a map of the Miami Port District on the main screen. He's moving hard assets. The coordinates point to a private terminal at the port of Miami. He's using his logistics company to ship something for the syndicate. What? Drugs? Weapons? Coulson asked. Or cash, Carter mused. Hard to move hundreds of millions in drug money without it being noticed. But if you hide it in plain sight. Isabella pulled up a shipping manifest from Oro Verde Logistics for the date of the last port drop. According to this, they shipped 12 containers of Peruvian artisanal pottery to a buyer in Casablanca. Pottery, Coulson scoffed. Right. It's a ghost shipment, Isabella said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The receiving company in Casablanca is a shell, dissolved 6 months ago. The terminal in Miami is owned by another shell, which traces back to Thorne Consolidated. It was the smoking gun, a direct physical link between Thorne's legitimate business and the cartel's operations. It was something tangible Evelyn Reed couldn't dismiss as an off-color joke. The next drop is in 3 days, Carter said, a new energy in his voice. We'll set up surveillance. We're going to catch him red-handed. Just as a wave of optimism swept through the room, Isabella's desk phone rang. It was the front desk. Agent Rossi, there's a delivery for you. A delivery? I didn't order anything. A moment later, a uniformed courier brought in a simple, elegant white box tied with a black ribbon. There was no card. Frowning, Isabella carefully opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black tissue paper, was a single silver fork. It was from Aurelia. Tucked beneath it was a small folded note. Her blood ran cold as she read the 5 words written in neat block letters. "I told you you'd pay." The silver fork was a clear message. A violation. Thorne, or someone acting on his behalf, knew where she worked, and by extension, who she was. It was a piece of the life she had pretended to have, now sent back to her as a threat. The casual elegance of the box made it even more sinister. It was a reminder of his world and his reach. "He's out," Coulson said grimly, walking over to her desk. "Reed got him bail. Judge set it at 50 million. He posted it an hour ago without blinking." Isabella held up the fork. "And he's already sending gifts." Coulson's face hardened as he read the note. He immediately keyed his radio. "Security, lockdown. I want a full sweep of this floor. Nobody in or out without my authorization. Get the courier's description and check all surveillance footage from the lobby." Assassin Carter was at her side in an instant. He looked at the box, his expression grim. This is an explicit threat against a federal agent. He just escalated this from a legal battle to something else entirely. "He's trying to intimidate me, to make me back off the case," Isabella said, her voice tight. "It's more than that," Carter countered. "With the Serpiente Syndicate, a threat is a promise. They don't make idle gestures. This isn't just from Thorne, this is from his partners. They're telling you they can get to you." The next 72 hours leading up to the port drop became a tense countdown. Isabella was assigned a protective detail, 2 stone-faced agents who shadowed her every move. From her apartment to the office and back. Her quiet, anonymous life was over. She felt like she was living in a fishbowl, constantly looking over her shoulder. The feeling of being watched was suffocating. She tried to push the fear aside, channeling it into her work. She and the team dug deeper into the Miami operation. They discovered that David Chen, Thorne's chief financial officer for Oro Verde Logistics, had abruptly resigned and vanished 2 months prior, shortly after the Panamanian informant had first contacted the Bureau. His records showed a massive one-time payment from an untraceable offshore account. He wasn't just a CFO, he was Thorne's architect for the whole money laundering scheme, Isabella explained to the team, pointing to Chen's photo on the evidence board. He designed the web of shell companies. When our informant surfaced, Thorne must have realized the system was compromised. He paid Chen off and made him disappear. Or he was forced to disappear, Coulson added darkly. He knows everything. He's the biggest liability Thorne has. Which means he might be the key to breaking this whole case, Carter concluded. If we can find David Chen, we can get him to testify. His testimony would be ironclad. It would bury Thorne and bypass any games Evelyn Reed wants to play. The night of the port drop arrived, thick with the humid, salty air of the Miami coast. A multi-agency task force, led by Isabella and Coulson, was in position. They were spread out in unmarked vehicles and concealed positions around the private terminal, a desolate landscape of stacked shipping containers and towering cranes under the sickly orange glow of sodium lamps. Isabella sat in a surveillance van, her eyes glued to a bank of monitors displaying feeds from a dozen hidden cameras. The tension was a living thing, coiling in her gut. Every shadow seemed to move, every gust of wind sounded like a footstep. ETA 2 minutes, an agent's voice crackled over her earpiece. Right on schedule, a black armored truck, the kind used for high-security transport, rolled up to the designated container. It wasn't an Oro Verde logistics truck, this was a professional outfit. 2 men, armed and alert, emerged and began to oversee the loading of several heavy-looking crates into the container marked artisanal pottery. "That's not pottery," Isabella murmured, zooming in on one of the crates. "The markings, that's military-grade hardware." "He's not just laundering money," Coulson said, his voice tight with disbelief. "He's supplying the syndicate, weapons, tech. This is a whole different level of conspiracy." Just as the last crate was being loaded, a sleek black sedan pulled up. The back door opened and Julian Thorne stepped out. He was dressed in a dark suit, looking as calm and in charge as he had in the restaurant. He was overseeing the operation personally. "We've got him," Carter's voice said over the comms. "He's on site, directly supervising a criminal act. This is it." All teams, prepare to move on my signal. Isabella felt a surge of adrenaline. This was the moment. They had him. But then something felt wrong. It was too easy. Thorne was arrogant, but he wasn't stupid. Why would he expose himself like this, especially just days after being arrested? Her eyes darted across the screens, searching for the detail that was bothering her. She saw Thorne speaking on his phone. She saw the armed guards. She saw the container. And then she saw it. A flicker of movement on the edge of a camera's frame, on the roof of a nearby warehouse. A glint of light. It wasn't a reflection. It was a scope. "Wait!" she yelled into her microphone. "It's a trap! Abort! Abort!" But it was too late. Carter had already given the signal. "All teams, go, go, go!" Floodlights ignited, bathing the terminal in brilliant white light. FBI vehicles swarmed in from all directions, sirens blaring. "FBI, drop your weapons. You are surrounded." Thorne didn't even flinch. He simply smiled, a cold, predatory grin, and put his phone back in his pocket. He turned and looked directly at the primary surveillance camera, as if he knew exactly where Isabella was watching from. And then all hell broke loose. It wasn't a sniper on the roof. It was dozens of them. Gunfire erupted, not from Thorne's men, but from all around the terminal. The FBI teams, who thought they were the hunters, had walked into a perfectly prepared kill box. The armed men loading the truck weren't cartel thugs. They were Thorne's private security, who immediately dropped their weapons and raised their hands, playing the part of victims. The shots were coming from the Serpient Syndicate's enforcers, hidden in the shadows. They weren't aiming at Thorne. They were aiming at the FBI. It was a massacre. Over the comms, Isabella could hear shouts, screams, the sound of shattering glass and twisting metal. "We've been set up," Coulson roared, drawing his weapon. "Rossi, stay in the van." Thorne calmly walked back to his sedan as chaos erupted around him. This entire operation wasn't a port drop. It was a performance. He had leaked the location, knowing the FBI would come. He had baited a trap using his cartel allies, and the bait was himself. His goal wasn't to ship weapons. It was to bloody the FBI, to create a public and bloody incident that would taint the entire case against him. Evelyn Reed wouldn't have to argue about entrapment anymore. She would argue that an illegal, overly aggressive FBI sting operation had resulted in the deaths of federal agents. He was manufacturing his own defense, written in blood. Isabella watched in horror, her mind racing. He was going to get away. He was going to drive away from a scene of carnage he had orchestrated and paint himself as the victim who was lucky to escape with his life. No, she wouldn't let him. Ignoring Coulson's order, she grabbed her sidearm, took a deep breath, and kicked open the door of the van. The air was thick with the smell of cordite and the deafening sound of automatic gunfire. She was no longer a waitress or a surveillance tech. She was a field agent, and the man responsible for this was about to get in his car and disappear. Not on her watch. The world outside the van was a maelstrom of strobing lights, deafening noise, and lethal chaos. Bullets whizzed through the air with angry hornet-like buzzes, ricocheting off shipping containers with high-pitched whines. The carefully planned FBI raid had devolved into a desperate firefight. Agents were pinned down, taking cover behind their vehicles, returning fire at unseen enemies. Isabella's training took over. She kept low, her senses on high alert, scanning the battlefield. Her target was the black sedan, its engine now rumbling to life. Thorne was slipping into the back seat, his face illuminated for a moment by the flashing emergency lights, his expression one of supreme satisfaction. He was the puppet master, watching his bloody marionette show unfold. "Coulson, I'm moving on Thorne," she yelled into her radio, knowing it was a breach of protocol but not caring. "Rossi, negative, stay put, that's an order." His voice crackled back, strained and distant. She ignored it. There was no time. She sprinted from the cover of the van, weaving between a forklift and a stack of pallets. The air was thick with tension. A bullet tore through the metal siding of a container just inches from her head, showering her with sparks. She didn't stop. The sedan began to pull away, its tires squealing on the asphalt. She had only seconds. Pushing her legs harder, she raised her pistol, using a two-handed grip, just as she'd practiced 1,000 times at the range. She wasn't aiming for Thorne, she was aiming for the car. She fired 3 shots in quick succession. The first 2 sparked against the rear fender, but the third found its mark, blowing out the rear driver's side tire. The heavy sedan fishtailed wildly, the driver fighting for control before slewing to a halt, crashing into a stack of empty barrels. The back door flew open and Thorne scrambled out, his composure finally gone, replaced by a snarl of pure fury. His driver emerged from the front, brandishing a pistol. Isabella immediately took cover behind a large concrete barrier, the driver's shots chipping away at the edge, sending dust and fragments into the air. She was pinned. The firefight was still raging around them, a brutal symphony of destruction. And now she was in a one-on-one standoff, with the architect of the whole nightmare just yards away. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the din. The thumping, rhythmic beat of helicopter rotors. A black, unmarked helicopter swooped in from over the water, its searchlight cutting a brilliant cone through the darkness. It wasn't FBI, it hovered over a clear area of the pier not far from Thorne's disabled car. A rope ladder dropped from its side, his escape plan. This was his real exfiltration route. The car was just for show. "You just don't know when to quit, do you, Waitress?" Thorne shouted over the noise, his voice filled with venom. He began running towards the helicopter, shielded by his driver, who was laying down suppressing fire. Isabella knew she couldn't let him reach it. She took a breath, centered herself, and in the split second between the driver's shots, she rose from cover and fired twice. Her aim was true. The driver cried out and crumpled to the ground, his pistol clattering on the pavement. Now it was just her and Thorne. He was exposed, halfway between the car and the helicopter, frozen in disbelief. The helicopter began to descend further, its downdraft whipping at their clothes and hair. "It's over, Thorne," she yelled, her voice raw. "There's nowhere to go." He stared at her, his face a mask of hatred. Then he laughed, a wild, unhinged sound that was almost lost in the noise. "You think this is about escape, you foolish girl? This was about a message, and the message has been delivered." He turned and continued his run for the ladder. Isabella sighted her weapon on him, her finger tightening on the trigger. She had the shot. But she was an FBI agent, not an executioner. Her orders were to bring him in alive. Just as he reached the ladder, Coulson and 2 other agents appeared, laying down cover fire that forced the helicopter to ascend rapidly. The ladder swung wildly out of Thorne's reach. He was cut off. Trapped. He stopped, turning to face the approaching agents, his chest heaving. For the first time, Julian Thorne looked defeated. The arrogance was gone, burned away by adrenaline and failure. All that was left was a cornered, desperate man. Isabella advanced on him, her weapon still raised. "On your knees, hands behind your head, now." He slowly complied, sinking to the grimy asphalt of the pier. As Coulson cuffed him for the second time, Thorne's eyes found Isabella's. "You may have won this battle, Agent Rossi," he hissed, his voice low and menacing. "But you haven't won the war. You have no idea what you've stumbled into. This is bigger than my money, bigger than the syndicate. You've just made enemies of people who make cartels look like street gangs." His words, even in defeat, sent a shiver down her spine, but she didn't let it show. She stood over him, no longer the invisible waitress, but the woman who had brought him down. The aftermath was grim. Several agents were wounded, 2 critically. The syndicate shooters had melted back into the night, leaving a trail of shell casings and chaos. But they had their man, and they had the evidence from the crates, which were indeed filled with sophisticated weaponry and encrypted communications gear. In the interrogation room hours later, Thorne sat in silence, Evelyn Reed by his side. Reed's composure was, for the first time, shaken. An orchestrated ambush on federal agents was something even she couldn't spin away. But Isabella's mind was on Thorne's final words, bigger than the syndicate. She spent the next week combing through the encrypted data from the communications gear they'd seized. It was a nightmare of code, but she found a vulnerability, a single file that hadn't been properly wiped. It was a ledger, not of money, but of names. As she decrypted it, the scope of Thorne's operation became terrifyingly clear. The Serpient Syndicate was just one client. He was a broker, a facilitator for a shadowy international consortium. The ledger listed arms deals with rogue states, technology transfers to terrorist cells, and illegal resource extraction operations across the globe. The names on the list weren't just criminals. They were powerful public figures, respected corporate leaders, and high-ranking government officials from several countries. Thorne wasn't just a white-collar criminal who got his hands dirty. He was a linchpin in a global network of corruption and violence, using his legitimate empire as a cover. The people he worked for were the true untouchables, ghosts who operated in the highest echelons of power. Isabella finally understood. The arrest at Aurelia hadn't been the end of the story. The shootout at the port hadn't been the climax. They were the prologue. By pulling on the thread of Julian Thorne, she had started to unravel a tapestry so vast and so dark it could threaten the very foundations of global security. Her victory felt hollow, replaced by a daunting sense of responsibility. She had stopped Thorne, but she had also put a target on her back, not just from a disgraced billionaire, but from an invisible empire he served. Her fight was far from over. It had just begun.